Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching Al24 News live from Algiers. Coming up next in our World News Program. Russia has reiterated a series of security demands that the US and its allies have already rejected, but it has also said for the first time that it is willing to discuss bilateral missile site inspections. The Australian government has said it planned to list the whole of the Palestinian movement Hamas to its list of outlawed terrorist organizations. The UK has pledged £25 million to strengthen security in the Indo-Pacific as part of a pact with Australia, and leaders of both countries expressed grave concerns about China's policies in its far western region of Xinjiang. The spokesperson of the Supreme Court of Honduras announces that former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez will be in pretrial detention and that a second hearing to examine the evidence will take place in mid-March. And at least 94 people were killed in mudslides and floods that ripped across a hilly part of Brazil's Rio de Janeiro state. The catastrophe in Petropolis occurred after 3 hours of severe rain on Tuesday. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that alliance saw no de-escalation from Russia around Ukraine's borders ahead of the first day of their meetings in Brussels to discuss the growing military standoff. Marwa Belaiwa reports.
On a day the Ukrainians are dubbing Unity Day, Russia is showing no signs of de-escalation at the border. Meanwhile, NATO defense ministers met to ease concerns over European security in Brussels. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says that continued military build-up is being seen in Russia, despite Moscow indicating their readiness to continue with diplomatic talks.
Peace and stability in the Euro-Atlantic area is under threat. There are signs from Moscow that diplomacy could continue, but so far we have not seen any sign of withdrawal or de-escalation.
This comes as Russia's Ministry of Defense said some of its troops were being moved back to their permanent bases, with video footage appearing to show soldiers withdrawing. Stoltenberg said that pullout does not represent a real de-escalation, as Russian equipment has been left behind to be used in the future. But Moscow has insisted a partial withdrawal is underway, while continuing to deny it has any plans to invade its neighbor.
Unfortunately, I am afraid this is the new normal which we need to be prepared for. NATO allies have been tireless in their efforts to work towards a political and diplomatic solution.
The NATO allies and other countries around the world have told Russian leaders that the country will pay a high cost if it invades Ukraine again. The alliance has sent concrete written proposals to Russia on transparency, risk reduction and arms control.
I think we have seen the opposite of some of the statements. We've seen an increase of troops over the last 48 hours, up to 7,000. We've seen a bridge constructed from Belarus into Ukraine or near Ukraine, and I think we should, as I've said, we'll take them at their word, but we're going to judge Russia by their actions, and at the moment the troop build-up continues.
For today, ministers decided to develop options for further strengthen NATO's deterrence and defence, including to consider establishing new NATO battle groups in Central and Eastern and Southeastern Europe.
The defense ministers decided to develop options to further strengthen NATO's deterrence and defense, including to consider establishing new NATO battle groups in Central and Eastern, Southeastern Europe.
Russia has reiterated a series of security demands that the US and its allies have already rejected, but it has also said for the first time that it is willing to discuss bilateral missile site inspections. Moscow accused Washington of failing to respond constructively to its requests, which include a halt to NATO's eastern enlargement and an assurance that Ukraine would never be allowed to join the alliance, in a lengthy letter sent to the US ambassador to Russia.
Our information indicates clearly that these forces, including ground troops, aircraft, ships, are preparing to launch an attack against Ukraine in the coming days. We don't know precisely how things will play out, but here's what the world can expect to see unfold. In fact, it's unfolding right now, today, as Russia takes steps down the path to war and reissued the threat of military action. First, Russia plans to manufacture a pretext for its attack. This could be a violent event that Russia will blame on Ukraine, or an outrageous accusation that Russia will level against the Ukrainian government. We don't know exactly the form it will take. It could be a fabricated so-called terrorist bombing inside Russia, the invented discovery of a mass grave.
Still with the same story, Sholkovsky says the large number of Russian troops on the border means the possibility of an attack must be taken seriously. Russia has continued to reinforce these forces, and with troops in Belarus and extensive naval drills in the Black Sea, it has very nearly surrounded Ukraine. An attack is possible this week. It's possible after the Beijing Olympic, and it's possible after the Brisbane Olympics, Sholkovsky says. Italian Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio said on Thursday that his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov had assured him Moscow wanted to find a diplomatic solution to the Ukrainian crisis. Speaking at a joint news conference following talks, Di Maio said he welcomed an announcement by Lavrov that Russia would send a reply to the United States later in the day on the issue of security guarantees.
Whether some of our partners are ashamed for starting this libel, this misinformation against Russia, this information terrorism, I do not know whether they're going to say they're sorry at any point, but we have to pressure them because they announced these invasion dates back in. They said it was going to be February 15, then February 16, then February 20th. They keep changing the date.
Tensions between Russia and NATO have reached unprecedented levels over troops movements near Ukraine. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko says his country would be ready to host nuclear weapons if threatened by the West. Lukashenko also said that Minsk could redeploy supernuclear weapons if their rivals and opponents took foolish and unreasonable steps. The Australian government has said it planned to list the whole of the Palestinian movement Hamas to its list of outlawed terrorist organizations. In response, Hamas spokesman Hazim Qasim said the movement strongly condemned Australia's decision on Thursday, saying the move pointed to clear bias toward the Zionist entity. He added that the planned listing contravenes international laws that protect Palestinians' rights to resist Zionist entity occupation. Europe and Africa are seeking to address three major challenges, namely security, health and stability, in order to change the status of their relations during the 6th summit of the European Union and African Union, which will be held for the 2 days in Brussels. Hussein Berkan reports.
The leaders of the European Union and the African Union are meeting at the 6th summit of the two unions, which will take place in the Belgian capital Brussels, nearly 5 years after the last edition in Abidjan. Representatives of more than 50 countries in the European Union and its African counterpart will discuss the new partnership between Europe and Africa, under the title Africa and Europe, Two Continents with a Common Vision until 2030.
Well, I think coming to Brussels is good to hear everyone's perspective, and this is what we're here for, to make good decisions. We came here to make sure that we work together for the benefit of the earth. Thank you.
It is expected that the issue of the crisis in the Sahel region will be at the center of the discussions, but it will not be the only topic raised at the summit, which comes 2 years later after it was postponed due to the health crisis that the world passed through after the spread of the corona pandemic. The president of Senegal, Macky Sall, leading the African Union, creates a West African dimension and a West European dimension that seeks to synergize the countries of the North and the South.
After nearly 10 years fighting an armed unrest, France and its allies in European force have announced they will begin withdrawing troops from Mali. The troops have been involved in the fight against terrorists in the country. Zahra Farjani reports.
French President Emmanuel Macron held a news conference Thursday morning at the Élysée Palace after African and Western leaders met in Paris on Wednesday night to start plans for how to continue fighting terrorists in the Sahel region once France and its European allies begin pulling troops out of Mali.
La France et ses partenaires engagés dans des missions de lutte contre le terrorisme.
France and its partners engage in counterterrorism missions, namely the states participating in the Takuba task force, have taken the decision to withdraw the military presence in Mali. This withdrawal will result in the closure of the Goussi right-of-way, Menaka and Gao. It'll be carried out in an orderly manner. The Malian armed forces, and with the United Nations mission in Mali, during this period we will maintain our support missions for the benefit of MINUSMA.
The decision also comes in light of the tense French financial relations, which finally reached the point of expelling the French ambassador from Bamako at the end of last January.
We hail the decision of France and Europe to withdraw their forces and stop their intervention in Malian territory. We agreed with Europe that the combat against the scourge of terrorism in the Sahel region is an African matter that should be resolved by African countries.
France attributes the withdrawal of its forces to diplomatic reasons. However, it is considered a severe setback for Paris, which observers attribute to the failure of the French military presence in Mali over the course of 9 years of the anti-terror mission, as the Élysée marketed.
The UK has pledged £25 million to strengthen security in the Indo-Pacific as part of a pact with Australia, and leaders of both countries expressed grave concerns about China's policies in its far western region of Xinjiang. Marwa Belawi reports.
Amid continued concerns about China's power and influence in the region, the United Kingdom has pledged $34 million as part of a commitment to promote peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific as it deepens a security deal with Australia. The funds will be used to strengthen regional resilience in areas including cyberspace, state threats, and maritime security. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison said in a joint statement after a video meeting on Thursday. The UK and Australia are deepening security ties as China becomes increasingly assertive about its territorial and maritime claims in the region. The joint statement said Johnson and Morrison recognized the importance of the countries being able to exercise their maritime rights and freedoms in the South China Sea, consistent with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. In Taiwan, which Beijing claims as its own, the Chinese Air Force has staged regular sorties into the island's air defense zone and stepped up pressure on countries, companies, and organizations that engage with self-ruled democracy.
Hong Kong's healthcare system has been overwhelmed by a surge in COVID-19 cases, with infected patients being treated outside crowded hospitals. The government has admitted it is struggling to contain the fifth wave of infections fueled by Omicron, but it has ruled out a citywide lockdown. In Germany, 2 years after the start of the outbreak in the country, restrictions to prevent contagion will begin falling away. According to a draft official plan, Germany will end most government restrictions to fight the coronavirus pandemic in March. Unvaccinated people can access to restaurants if they show a negative test, while basic protection measures, including the wearing of medical masks in public, will still remain applied. The Austrian government said that it plans to end most of the country's COVID-19 restrictions on March the 5th, though wearing masks will remain obligatory in some places. Chancellor Karl Nehammer announced the decision at a news conference in Vienna. Officials stressed that the pandemic is not yet over, but a stabilization in new infections allows Austria, which recently became the first European country to enshrine obligatory vaccinations for most adults in law, to open up step by step. Police in Ottawa have ordered truck drivers who are blocking the city's downtown core to leave or risk detention, as authorities step up attempts to disperse an anti-government demonstration that has paralyzed the city for over 3 weeks. On the other hand, organizers say that they will not end their protest until all measures are dropped. More details in this report.
We're your people, like when it comes down to...
On the same day, the provincial and state authorities called for an end to the cross-border vaccine requirement that triggered the truck-led campaign. Canadian police issued an ultimatum to protesters who have been blocking Ottawa streets for 20 days to leave the capital. Anyone caught blocking streets or participating in the demonstrations will be arrested and charged, as well as penalties and truck seizures. Despite a court injunction against the deafening noises being extended on Wednesday by a nearby homeowner, angry up with the disturbances, all official warnings were ignored by the protesters.
Oh, well, you know, you can't be blocking streets or assisting others.
Are you going to leave?
Or committing a criminal offense.
Are you leaving?
Am I leaving? Is this my country? I pay taxes? No, I'll stay wherever I want. And I support the truckers 100%. No, 1,000%.
In a letter signed by 16 U.S. governors, Montana Governor Greg Gianforte asked Canadian and U.S. authorities to exempt truckers from vaccine and quarantine regulations when crossing the Canada-U.S. border.
The timing of your decision to terminate the vaccine and quarantine exemptions could have not been worse, as North America already faces grave supply chain constraints. These constraints, combined with increasing inflation, place significant burdens on the residents of Canada and the United States.
46 protesters were arrested and 37 vehicles seized during police operations at the Ontario-Michigan border. And in Coutts, Alberta, 4 people were charged with conspiracy to murder police officers.
The spokesman for the Supreme Court of Honduras announces that former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez will be in a pretrial detention, and the second hearing to examine the evidence will take place in mid-March. The former leader is claimed by the American justice system, which suspects him of being linked to drug trafficking. Hassan Barkan.
Ex-President Hernandez presented to a judge who must rule on his extradition. The former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez, claimed by the American justice who suspects him of being linked to the trafficking of 500 tons of cocaine, was presented on Wednesday to a judge of Supreme Court who must rule on his extradition to the United States. The day after his arrest, in Tegucigalpa, the former head of state was transferred to the seat of the Supreme Court of Honduras in the midst of an imposing police deployment with the support of armored vehicles and helicopters. According to the spokesman for the Supreme Court of Honduras, Melvin Duarte, a judge appointed by the highest court is now responsible for examining the information transmitted by Washington to justify its request of extradition.
In order to guarantee his presence, that of former President Juan Orlando Hernandez, during the extradition proceedings, the provisional detention will take place in the premises of the Cobra Special Forces Command of the National Police. A hearing is set for the presentation and examination of evidence, which constitutes the second hearing in these proceedings.
The review process could take up to 4 months. Juan Orlando Hernandez, 53, is accused by American justice of having facilitated between 2004 and 2022 the passage of some 500 tons of cocaine through Honduras, knowing that the drug was intended for the United States. He would also have received millions of dollars in bribe from drug traffickers to prevent any investigation, detention, or extradition against them. In 2013, the year he was elected leader of the country, he reportedly received $1 million from notorious Mexican criminal Joaquin El Chapo Guzman.
According to local authorities, at least 94 people were killed in mudslides and floods that ripped across a hilly part of Brazil's Rio de Janeiro state. The catastrophe in Petropolis occurred after 3 hours of severe rain on Tuesday. Islam Sidi reports.
Videos reflect the disaster scale which devastated the Brazilian city Petropolis. Landslides and flash floods drift cars and buses away as if they were toys. Nothing could stand on Mother Nature's way. Nearly 100 people have died during landslides and the flash floods as a result of the torrential rainfall. More than 80 houses were destroyed completely in hillside neighborhood. Rescue teams were working around the clock and struggling with the mud searching for survivors. According to Brazil's National Civil Defense, who tweeted that 24 people had been rescued. However, 94 people couldn't make it alive.
The teams are working around the clock. They won't stop the search at all. They will continue except for 1 or 2 hours for technical reasons. But if everything goes normally, we won't stop at all.
Up to 300 survivors who lost their homes are being sheltered. And donations are being called for, including clothing and food.
It's an area that doesn't have a water catchment system. The public authorities don't come here to do their part. So that's also the cause of what's happening.
The city's mayor has announced a state of emergency, and President Bolsonaro has already urged immediate help for the victims. Scientists believe that climate change has affected the heavy rains, which is considered as the latest in series of rainfall to hit Brazil in the past months.
In South Korea, a new program has been established to help defectors from the north better integrate by assisting them in starting their own enterprises. More than 33,000 defectors now live in the south, although many are struggling to adjust. Sofian Kanturi has more details.
North Koreans have departed the nation despite legal penalties for political, ideological, religious, economic, moral, or personal reasons. Since the split of Korea after World War II, the North Korean regime refers to such people as North Korean defectors. The South Korean government launched an interagency team tasked with helping North Korean defectors suffering from economic and psychological difficulties after resettlement here.
I'm convinced this is an opportunity for people like you and future generations to dream big.
The Ministry of Unification said the 9-member team, comprising officials from different government agencies, will provide support in fields ranging from education and employment to living and psychological counseling for the defectors.
Starting businesses that produce good services for both the North and the South can help reduce the psychological distance between the two Koreas.
The defectors' average monthly wage stood at 2.27 million won in 2021, 457,000, more less than the national average. According to a survey of 2,465 defectors aged 15 and older by the Korean Hana Foundation affiliated with the Ministry of Unification.
To another story now, the central mosque in Indian administrated Kashmir's largest city has largely remained closed for the past 2 years amid a bitter dispute between Indian authorities and Kashmiri Muslims. Usama Ayadi.
The centuries-old mosque in the Indian administrated Kashmir center has been out of bounds for Friday prayers for over 2 years. Jamia Masjid, or Pride of Kashmir, is standing tall in Ohata, in the heart of Srinagar city, from last 600 years. Jamia Masjid has an area of 146,000 square feet and is quadrangular in shape, roughly square, with 4 minarets. This religious spot can gather 33,000 Muslim worshippers, who fill in the middle of that building made of brick and wood, and they even pray on the road surrounding the mosque. Kashmir Muslim majority stands in lanes to offer their peaceful prayers in special occasions. For Indian authorities, the mosque is a spot for troubles, It is a nerve center for clashes and protests that challenge the sovereignty of India in the Kashmir region that is a spot of conflict. Amid these tensions, the mosque has mostly been shuttered for the past 2 years. The mosque's chief imam has been detained inside his home almost non-stop throughout that time. And the mosque's main gate has been padlocked and blocked with corrugated tin sheets on Fridays. The closure of the 378-pillar mosque, which is revered by Indian-administrated Kashmir's mostly Muslim population, has deepened anger among them. In the past, officials said the government was forced to close the mosque because its management committee was unable to stop anti-Indian protests on the premises. However, Indian authorities refused to further comment on the mosque restrictions, despite repeated queries from the Muslim majority in the region and press agencies.
That's all for me, Nadia Kasmi, and the rest of the team. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.